So, today the lecture was about, the announced topic was about, I forget what it was. Anyway, we'll talk about it because what I want to do, we're getting a series of 12 lectures. So that I will then have said everything I have to say, and I can rest peacefully in the great beyond, you see. I don't want at the last moment to say, oh gosh, I forgot to tell them all about it. That's a good rule of thumb, you know, for spiritual decisions, is what do you want to be responsible for on your deathbed? And I remember making a number of decisions in my life, because the last moment is really quite a confrontation. Anyway, today the topics are really the emphasis of, in other words, in that talk we will try and cover that subject. However, we always cover all of it. So every lecture I want, you know, complete is really complete in a way, but the emphasis is different. So we'll talk for a while, and then I'll talk for a while, and then we'll have a break. And then after that, we'll have questions and answers. In the past, we've had people write them and send them up, but you can also just, because we have a very good sound system now, you can just ask them from the audience. You raise your hand, and I'll repeat the question. That'll make it easier for everyone. And I don't see all that well to read those cards anyway. I don't know what they say. I just make a wild guess. Yeah. All right. So today we're emphasizing the map of consciousness as it applies, what it is, what is the world, and then how that relates in general to the whole field of consciousness. You're aware that consciousness, as defined in the writings that I've been doing, can roughly be defined as the linear and the nonlinear. The linear being the ego, the world of form, definition, that which is temporal, that which the world believes is reality, as compared, and this is just a point of perception, it's not a different level, but compared to the nonlinear, which is not definable as form, is considered by a large percentage of the world to be unreal, and is classically defined as spiritual. The map of consciousness crosses over between the two. The importance of the book Power versus Force was after 30 years of not saying anything about the subject at all, I suddenly became an expert. How to define, how to make it possible to go from the known to the unknown. The radical subjectivity of a spiritual state is difficult to describe. And as I say, for 30 years I never mentioned it. And then saw this medical test called kinesiology. It was considered a medical test. And when I saw John Diamond do that, kinesiology, instantly I saw what it was. Because I was myself already, my reality was nonlinear, and therefore I saw it from a different dimension than the rest of the audience. It was always presumed to be a local phenomena, where a local condition causes a local reaction. And I saw that it was a nonlinear phenomena, and that the reaction was due to the presence of a nonlinear state of consciousness. So it opened then that kinesiology could be used beyond the linear and beyond the local, and in experimenting with it over many years now, we found that we had a means of directly accessing a field called consciousness, which is again very iffy to people who live in the Newtonian paradigm of reality. Consciousness in that definition is whether you're awake or asleep. Consciousness in the spiritual definition, of course, is the field, and the field from which one is aware of one's existence. And the content of mind, it is the field, and it's not the content. So the world, the ordinary world, lives in the world of content, takes the subjective for granted without appreciating what it actually is. The subjective is where we exist. We exist, our knowingness, our awareness that we are, or that anything else is only because of a radical state of subjectivity. It's roughly called awareness, consciousness, and the thing that differentiates it from the Newtonian paradigm is that the subjective has no content. So we might say that the world is, let's say if computers had arms and legs and were walking around, the computers in the ordinary world would all think that they're their software. They'd say, I'm Mr. QuickBooks, glad to meet you, and you're Miss IRS computer form number 660, glad to meet you. And then there would be a maverick in the midst of all of them who walks around and says, well, I'm my hardware, I'm none of those things. And they would consider him slightly insane and put him off in a corner. So if he's wise, he doesn't mention that, and I never did for 30 years. That I'm my hardware, and the software comes and goes. But the one reality behind all computers is without hardware, there's no software programs possible. So the world thinks it's its programs. All right, so today we're going to talk about those programs and, of course, illuminate the whole understanding of consciousness itself as a consequence. Most everybody here has read Power versus Force, or maybe Eye of the Eye, either way. You know, the map of consciousness has become extremely well known. It's widely quoted, and I get requests every day to reprint it in some publication or article. So it's become a useful tool. So we should really then understand what it really reflects. What does it really reflect? And as we will see, it's a way of describing the ego, is really what it is. If we look at society, we were talking about the map of consciousness as it's expressed in today's society. If we look at the world and society, what we see is the ego projected out there. The world itself is a playground, a graveyard, an amusement center, depending on your point of perception. Yeah. So I consider it entertainment. It's sort of like turning on the TV. And yesterday morning's newspaper was dramatic. It had two of the most horrible stories you could possibly read. And it just broke me up because, you know, it's like the world pushes the extreme just like TV programs do, push the extreme. One was a baby that got left, 3-year-old left home by its parents with their pet python. When they came home, the baby was dead. The python had strangled it to death. What do they think the python was going to do? Play dominoes with the kid? I don't know. So anyway, you say, yeah, right, well, when I was a kid, my grandmother would always read the newspaper and then she would cry. She would always find a sad story and cry. And my grandfather would get very irritated with her. Molly, will you cut that out? There's this little 3-year-old tyke. He was strangled to death by a python. And she would weep and weep. So to her it was sad. to me the story was like ridiculous. Like, life is a theater of the absurd, you know? Theater of the absurd. So we'll talk about these levels of consciousness to get them clarified for once and for all, what they mean, and clear up any confusions that there could be about it. To begin with, they are neither better or worse. It is not a hierarchy of worthiness or accomplishment. It is a way of looking like a prism. A prism breaks up the light into its different colors. It doesn't mean that ultraviolet is better than blue or better than green. So what we've done here is break up, you know, the levels of consciousness with a prism, and these would be the colors that come out. So these colors, I can walk anywhere now today, right? These are, what they are is progressive levels of power within the field of consciousness, first of all. The higher you go, the greater the power. It's, to some degree, it's like a thermometer. And this thermometer, then these are various degrees of power. They are also various degrees of love. They also are various degrees to which you might say the presence of God is consciously reflected into life. To transcend the opposites, it's necessary to give up a positionality. And we use the thermometer as an example. You can't just say, put your finger here and say, well, above it it's hot and below it's cold, and now hot and cold are opposite. That's what the mind does. We took that up in the lecture on, or we will be, on transcending the opposites. To reach the state of, so-called state of enlightenment, is necessary to drop all positionalities, in which duality disappears. And that is the pathway of Advaita, which we'll have a lecture on. Any dropping of positionality. So, neither the presence of God as it is manifested, as it manifests and radiates through a specific consciousness, then. We would say at the top is that the light is clearer, that there's less darkness in the field, and that's why they're called enlightened states. The light actually is almost an experiential, it's almost like a great clarity and light does suffuse everything. As the ego imposes itself between truth and its own egocentricity, we might say that the bottom is egocentricity. Let's say that the bottom of if the top is God, what is the bottom? The bottom is profound states of egocentricity, out of which considerable damage to the world can come, in our view of it. Let's say Mr. Bin Laden calibrates at 70, which is down in here, and so that which is below tends to bring what we consider somewhat destructive, but that, of course, is a point of view. It was constructive from his viewpoint. So again, constructive and destructive are only positionalities. The levels of consciousness, however, we were able to calibrate using kinesiology. And I forget how we even started with it, but the levels are really traditional. It's really the perennial philosophy, only documented. And I've been I was going to say brought up as a psychiatrist. Yeah, brought up as a psychiatrist. I was brought up as a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst and psychoanalyzed. And so I naturally applied these things as I understood life and the human mind. So these are states that are both emotional, emotional, and intellectual, and spiritual. And these are the names by which we commonly know these phenomena in daily life: anger, fear, grief, pride, hope, all those things. Then to give it an additional usefulness. It's been calibrated, and the calibrations turned out to be logarithms. So that a move of a few points on this scale, as you're aware in a log, is to tend to that number. So it's a very sizable move, a very sizable move. The move from, let's say, 200 to 202 does not sound much numerically, but because you're talking about the logarithm, it's 10 to the 202nd power rather than 200th power, so numerically that's quite a difference. Where is that in society? Well, we found that most government agencies calibrate about 202. Yeah, 200 is the level of integrity. So we said 200 and over, we made the interesting discovery that 200 and over, that some things made you go strong and then some things made you go weak. So we discovered that kinesiologically then, consciousness is aware of the difference between truth and falsehood, between that which is pro-life, that which is detrimental to life. And on a scale of 1 to 1,000, so we said, well, on 1 to 1,000, what is this dividing line? It came out 200. We said, is it over 150? So these numbers were arrived at pragmatically by discovery. Their value is relative. Their value is relative. Anybody can make up their own scale. You can make up a scale 1 to 10. You can make up a scale 1 to 100. You can make up your own scale. If you're going to do calibrations and try to arrive at numbers to compare to this map, you have to sort of prefix it with, as compared to this map, so-and-so or something calibrates over 200. As some people don't do that, and they come up with strange numbers, that their baby calibrates over 2,000 and things. They send me excited telegrams. They do, literally. We get faxes, phone calls, stuff around the clock. Well, they're just newborn babies. These 1,200, wasn't it? It's only good. They say, whoa, I thought the baby Jesus has just reemerged. So, if you're not getting the same number. All right, so it's a relative scale. It's not an absolute scale. It's useful. It is profoundly useful. On the one hand, you could ignore it completely and just trust and love God, and that's sufficient. That's so. You don't have to do any of this. But being a human being with a mind is probably not going to satisfy you to do that. And as somebody said to me, it's also quite boring. This does add some entertainment on the way. It is better than saying the rosary thousands of times, which can be very boring if you ever tried it. And you get up to about 1,000, man, it's like a drop-over deal. And Jesus still is not he's showing himself in the room, so anyway. All right. The world then is interesting. In the books that I'm writing, I sometimes cite events in the world, and people will say, well, why are you saying something about the world? It's not because I'm concerned about the world, it's because it reflects the ego. When you read the daily newspaper, you're seeing your own ego projected out there. It's really a neat teaching tool. I love the evening news because it's hysterically entertaining, because you see the games the ego's playing, and the ego speaks through this person's mouth and then this person's mouth, you know. You know what I mean? It's a violation of our civil rights to, you know, or say in God we trust. Okay, you could say in God we don't trust, or we could say we don't trust in anybody. How's that? Forget trust. I mean, you can't even bring up the thing without a political, you know what I'm saying? All right, so anyway, we found that there was a critical level. This is known in foreign cultures. When we were in Korea, they said, well, that's the way they buy a tangerine in the store. If the tangerine makes you go strong, you buy it. If it makes you go weak, they don't buy it. Commonly known. Based on the strict, obvious physiologic basis that all that is has certain characteristics. Protoplasm, if you it withdraws from that which is noxious. It bleeds if you stick a needle in it. That's impersonal. So these fields these calibrated fields are impersonal. Kinesiologic test is impersonal. I didn't introduce you to my right arm, Susan. Say hello to, this is my right arm. And many of the numbers, right now we're working on a book that's going to have 1,000 calibrations, everything and anything that ever was on the planet that ever meant anything, from Cicero and Nero to the Pieta to Westminster Abbey to all the great beings throughout the great books of the Western world, etc. So we do lots and lots, and she is literally my right arm, as you can see. All right, so these are very pragmatic. They are very useful. They're radically useful because it tells the difference between truth and falsehood. It was devastating. And a few people who first reviewed the book were totally devastated. One man took off, went to Europe, and spent 2 weeks to recover from the shock. The realization that you can tell truth from falsehood is so profound that hardly anybody gets the implication. No, at no time in human history has there been any way to tell truth from falsehood whatsoever. And we see all kinds of approximations, the scientific method, and all these desperate attempts to tell what Susan and I can tell in a second. You look at the IRS form, you know, and I said, well, we could either spend about, I think it takes an average of 16 hours to fill it out or something like that, or we could say, let's see, we owe them over 2,000, 3,000, 4,400. There we go. You send them a check, we check with kinesiology, this is what we owe you. So Sonia's sitting in the back there, does all my manuscripts. She spends endless thousands of hours writing all these books and editing them. And we all, that's how we say, how much do I owe you? 800, 900, 1,000, 1,000. Okay. That's how we figured. Other people would have a long tabulation with a time clock, time in, time out, time to go to the bathroom. Should that be on the clock or not? You know what I mean? All right. To be able to tell the difference between truth and falsehood is enormous, profound. Its implications, its applications in just about everything in society is profound. In the daily news, there's always a war someplace, and in every war, the United States, for some reason, never knows what's happening. The U.S. is always surprised. Surprised by Pearl Harbor. Yesterday it was surprised. Last week it was surprised that they attacked someplace in Afghan, and they were surprised to find it was loaded with zillions of soldiers. They only thought there was a few people there. They're always surprised, and never seem to know what's happening. They were surprised by the attack. So its implication is to not know is to be vulnerable, and to know is a much better position to be in. It would be better to know how many soldiers are hiding in the caves there than to walk in with half a dozen people and find you're surrounded by 1,000 or something. All right, so the usefulness is very, very pragmatic in daily life. Lots of times a question will come up and we just ask kinesiology, we get a yes or no, and that solves it, you know. You notice that a lot of people are very familiar with this thing, and we've talked about it before, so I don't want to spend undue time on it. However, the critical point is whether a thing is over 200 or below 200. You don't need to know the number. Either a thing makes you go strong with kinesiology or it makes you go weak. Now, how accurate is the test itself? I'm not a kinesiologist. Kinesiologists there are many people who are expert. They do it all day, every day, and they're very, very adept at it. They know various techniques. There's the ring technique where you can pull and see if you compare how strong you are holding Jesus in mind and how strong you are holding Bin Laden in mind. Get a yes or no. We say generally if it's an important question, we like kinesiology with two people. One reason is if you can find somebody you can work with, and that can be a problem. A lot of married couples cannot work with each other. They have to find some other person for reasons I'm not sure. But if you find somebody you can work with, and you work with them consistently, so if you're involved in it in sort of a very serious way, what happens is that the person you work with becomes strangely attuned to almost your question. If almost as I walk over to ask, a knowingness comes on, and the answer is there. In fact, I can feel it run down my arm as I ask it. You become quite adept at it after a while. The person that works with you gets to almost intuitively tune in to, I'm searching for something and I have no clue to it, and suddenly she'll say, what about the so-and-so? And we ask, and yes, that's what we were looking for. So the value of having a partner is their intuition is added to yours, and you can accomplish rather formidable tasks in very short order. There are people who are trained in it. There are techniques that are well demonstrated in videos, books, and audio tapes. I can't think of his name right now, but we do have a sheet of references to kinesiology teachings on the internet, various resources. Switched-on Living is done by, what's his name?
Jerry Teplitz.
Huh?
Jerry Teplitz.
Teplitz, yeah. Yeah, it does a very neat demonstration. So, as I say, I'm not a kinesiologist. My only interest, like Galileo's interest in telescopes, was, you can see out there, but he wasn't really, a telescope maker. It wasn't really his thing. So we refer questions on the techniques out to people who are good at it. And in many communities, the chiropractors are the best at it. They use it more extensively than, or holistic doctors. So anyway, it's an extremely useful technique. Yes or no. People say, well, can I get the same answers with dowsing? The answer is generally yes. Generally yes. As far as yes or no, as far as a yes or no answer. All right, so the calibrated levels then have enormous significance in doing the most important events, people, and places in all of human history. You get almost a topographical map. You begin to get an understanding of human history that you're not capable of getting from just dry linear facts or even from travelogues. You begin to see how consciousness evolves, and so in the book I'm just finishing, I try to track the evolution of consciousness throughout time and throughout all of evolution up to its present point, and the emergence of a new level of consciousness, a new kind of humanity. Out of Homo sapiens, we see what Homo sapiens has been up to the last several thousand years. Before that, we had Cro-Magnon man and we had Neanderthal man. And you see, I'm not politically correct. I don't call him I call him Neanderthal. I grew up with Neanderthal, and that's going to have to be good enough. Anyway, the most important thing we discovered for mankind in general was that the level of consciousness of mankind went from 190, where it had been for many, many centuries, and went to 207 about 1986. That began then the emergence of a whole new paradigm of what's possible for mankind, despite today's headline news. And it signaled to me, anyway, the emergence of a new paradigm of reality, and it signaled the emergence of a new branch off the evolutionary tree, which I call Homo spiritus. Homo sapiens did not have spiritual awareness. Homo sapiens have been busy killing each other and murdering each other and drowning each other for centuries and centuries and centuries, killing each other off at the rate of $70 million lives in one big sweep, World War II. Now, a new emergence is the dominance then of a positive spiritual energy dominating the consciousness field of mankind. So what you could get away with, what was acceptable in past times, it was assumed if you captured an enemy, naturally you enslaved them, raped them, pillaged them, and killed them, often and mutilated them in horrible ways. And that was considered okay, it's the way the world is, and nobody questioned it. At a consciousness level 207, there would be a cry of outrage, an outrage. So, the fact that our consciousness has now emerged, so a new emergence of awareness is dominating the whole field of human consciousness with profound implications for everyone. All right, so 200 then denotes a difference between, and again, it is not a level of opposites. It's not that 200 above is one reality and below 200 is another reality. It's not good versus bad. This is a thermometer, and and the presence of God, the presence of love, is what accounts for the calibration. Above this level, you go strong, and below it goes weak. And it looks like you're looking at true and false. It looks like you're looking at good and evil, but that is not the case. The case is that, you see, water is still water, whether it's ice, liquid, or steam. The only thing that changes there is temperature. Above this temperature, you got over 212, it changes its quality. Then below 212, it turns back into liquid, it changes its quality, but it's still just water. Then at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it changes its quality and turns into a solid. So you can't say steam is the opposite of ice, or that water is the opposite of steam. You understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to get out of trying to use this in any kind of a positionality. As the temperature increases or decreases, then quality, the same with light in a room. There's not two different things, light and dark. Huh? There is intense light. As the light gets lower and lower and lower, it gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, then it's harder and harder to see. And we say it's dusk or dark, There's only one variable, and that's light, the presence of light. That's the only variable. There's not two things, light and dark. You can't take a box of darkness and put it someplace or say, shine me some darkness in this closet. It doesn't have any existence. The only reality then is light, and light is either present or not present, and it's present to varying degrees. So the analogy is that the love of God is like the light, and up here the love of God is quite intense, and down here it diminishes and becomes progressively darker. When this happens, the human emotion that goes with it goes through the whole panorama, from an ecstatic state, there's a state beyond ecstasy, a blissful state of absolute serenity and stillness. As the calibrated levels come down, you see the shift of emotions. And below 200, we notice that these emotions are classically negative and painful. And here down at the bottom, they become quite severe, and suicide, they even lead to suicide. The interesting thing about calibrated levels of consciousness is that everybody has a calibrated level of consciousness the instant they're born. The instant they're born, there's already a calibratable level of consciousness, which has a certain implication. We'll have another lecture in which we talk just about karma itself. Either life is extremely unfair, or there is a coherence and a spiritual coherence to the universe, in which case there is no such thing as accidental. In a coherent universe in which the presence of God is the infinite context out of which all reality arises, there is no such thing as an accident. Accident, like the word chaos, means a limitation of perception. It means from the Newtonian point of view, it looks like an accident. But from the overall point of view, there are no accidents possible, understand? The infinite reality of God, then, is like an infinite electromagnetic field. its power is absolute. Its power is unlimited. Its power is infinite. All that is held within the infinite power of the infinite context of God. Nothing can happen outside of it. Consequently, an accident is not possible. For an accident to be so, it would have to be outside the infinite context of the universe. And if it was there, you wouldn't know it. So no accident is possible. Everything falls within a coherence. Each thing is where it is because of what it is. Each thing becomes the fulfillment of its own essence, and in so doing, its characteristics define where it will position itself within the overall infinite field of power. So that you see, nothing is causing anything. Everything is just being what it is. As a consequence of its being what it is, it automatically moves in an infinite field of power. Is that clear? Yeah. So that takes care of causality. Causality. It's important to understand that because we want to get it past the barriers of picturing God as some kind of a judgmental, arbitrary being. And people fear death because now you're going to meet the great judgmentalism. Huh? All right, so each thing is where it is, and it's being what it is, because out of creation, its essence then defines that if it has wings, it flies, you see? Yeah, but that's coming out of its own essence. So those who seek God do so out of the evolution of their own consciousness, because the quality of consciousness is to progressively seek to know its own nature. All right.
Doctor,
Yes.
are questions permitted now, or would you rather?
Anytime.
In essence, then, are we saying if it's,
If you got to stand up and speak so I can hear.
in essence,
You hear what he
are you
says?
in essence, are you saying that if there's no accidents, then does that make it predestined in a sense?
That question always arises. The entire universe is one karmic unity. People say, do you believe in karma? It's not a matter of believing in karma. The entire universe is one infinite coherence, the context of which has infinite power, because the power arises out of context. Therefore, out of the infinite potentiality that we tend to call God, arises the entire universe as an obvious coherence. What was the question? Oh, accident, yes, right. So each thing then, what occurs is a result of the essence of its own reality. Each thing then, you might say, has its own karma within the infinite coherence of the universe. Nothing can fall outside the universe, so consequently everything within the universe is subject to the laws of the universe. Each thing then is the result of what it is. Spiritually, what it is the accumulated result of its own decisions by its own spiritual will. By one's own spiritual will, one rises or falls like a cork in the water. Huh? Each moment we choose, instant by instant, to constantly choose in one direction, to constantly choose the direction of the light eventuates in constantly going in this direction. To refuse the light, which is your privilege, yeah, everyone is created free. One can refuse God, refuse the love of God, one can condemn God, one can curse God, and thereby choose the dark. The dark is by one's own choice. And those who ridicule God will then go to realms occupied by those who ridicule God. Huh? If we calibrate them, they're not where you want to go. And that's what Jesus said. You don't want to go there. He said it's not wrong, it's just that you really don't want to go where the sinful go when they die. And the Buddha said the same, that every great religion and spiritual teacher tells you the same thing, you know, that you really don't want to go there. Anybody who's ever been in profound guilt, shame, agony of depression and loss, or terror, or hopeless rage, those are the approaches to hell. And when you get to where it really gets bad. So the great teachers have advised us that it's not where you want to go, and that is a correct statement. So it's not that we're predestined, because predestination sounds arbitrary. You can only be that which you are. Let me answer it that way. By the nature of existence and beingness, one can only be what one is. What one is, one has sculpted by one's own hand. So, and therein lies the infinite justice of God. All right, so these emotions then, as they go up the scale, become increasingly agreeable. These are, everybody comes to see the doctor in these states. This is my office down here. Despair and anxiety and depression and angriness, and people don't see me out of arrogance, but yeah, they do. Anyway, as we go up, we see the levels are far more, and that's because the process is different. Here you, at the level of integrity, you have the real true beginning of empowerment at 200. Below that, you get inflation. The reason I don't like politically correct is because it calibrates at 190. And there's a grating holier than thou superiority about it. And it's not held up, its results don't verify it. So there's an ego inflation, egotism here. Over here, at the lower levels, the ego shrinks, you see. But here it's inflamed and pridefulness. Here we have the anger. The anger gives people a temporary sense of power. It's a false sense of power. It's the most difficult problem I have. I'm chief of staff at a big residential place where we have 50 teenage girls, and their main problem is angriness, other than impulsivity and poor judgment and getting into all kinds of horrible trouble. But on a day-to-day level, they're getting along with each other is constantly impaired with angriness. They're always angry. They're like Johnny One Note. No matter what happens, their only response is anger. You know what I mean? If it's too cool in the room, they're angry about that. If it's too warm, they're angry about that. If I mention a certain subject, they're angry about that. And if I don't, they're angry because I didn't mention it. So, I mean, it's just a proneness to angriness. If you don't have any power, the next best if you fail power, see, these are all levels of weakness. If you don't have any real power, then the next thing to do is to inflate yourself. So you see the puffed up arrogance of Milosevic, you know, when they take his picture, he's always got his head up like this. And the UN and all the countries of the world have no right to question what I do. I mean, that's wow. And all right, so from 200 down are really levels of weakness, and 200 and over are levels of power. If you have real power, you don't need all that. Huh? It's like self-esteem. If you lack self-esteem, then you feel you need self-esteem. If you have self-esteem, you don't need self-esteem, and you're not even interested in it. You know, if people think you're fine, you're glad they're happy. If they don't think you're fine, it's their problem. You know, what people think about you is sort of irrelevant because you're autonomous. So these people are not autonomous. What people think about them makes a big, very big difference. Because they're levels of weakness, then, these are levels of force. Up here you have power. Power just stands there by itself. Power influences everything within its domain as a consequence of that which it is. That which you are has a more profound effect on everything than that which you do. Huh? That's sort of the meaning of the spiritual teacher who says, don't worry about saving the world, save yourself, because through the evolution of your own consciousness, you're already doing more for mankind than you can do out there with placards and take God out of business or whatever it is. Whatever it is. The world, you see, is just a story, a perceptual story as witnessed by the ego, and therefore there's nothing out there that needs saving. Don't waste your time saving the world. Save yourself, because thereby you radiate forth that which has a profound influence. You see, force always results in counterforce. So force goes from here to there and requires counterforce. It exhausts itself. Sooner or later, the troops on this side and the troops on this side are going to deplete their resources. At least the numbers of the population are going to decrease, you can say that. In due time, they die by the millions. So, therefore, force is relatively weak, and it's what the world relies on. The world relies on force. Those who have enormous power don't need to bother with force. So these people resort to force because they lack power. Inflation makes you feel important. Being aggressive and angry makes you feel, the animal swells up with anger, and he puffs up there and he goes boom, 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 and he tries to intimidate. You know, power is you get in a flick of an eyebrow. Huh? I would do something, I'd look at my father, a flick of his eyebrow, and instantly I'd behave differently. He didn't have to beat me, threaten me, anything, you know. It's because of where we were, you know, probably a mutuality on a certain level. The slightest flick of the eyebrow was sufficient, and it still is for me. All a person has to do is say, and I got it right away. I got it. All right. Here the people becomes enslaved, they become addicted. This is the level of cravingness, this is wantingness. So up here you were arrogant, here you hate everybody, you're angry at everybody. 125 is the level of wantingness. This comes out of the solar plexus, just as the higher levels come out of the crown chakra, the third eye, and we get to love the heart. And now we're down to the solar plexus. The solar plexus is also a level of courage. Courage. You have to have a lot of guts to get out there in the world. But if you get caught in it, too much energy in the solar plexus, you get into cravingness and wantingness. And the difficulty with this is you can never satisfy it. You buy this, it's satisfied for the moment, but tomorrow you'll want that. The next day you want that. And it's endless. It can lead, of course, to the addictions, drugs and alcohol, sexual addictions, the cravingness for power and wealth and worldly goods and things like that. Or it can be a craving for experience and novelty, chasing sexual partners and racking up a score and various things, craving adulation of the public. So the cravingness is difficult because it's not satisfiable. There's no end point. That which is real has an end point. You strive for this, you get it, now you're satisfied. But here there's no satisfaction. This is, you say, you read about these people that have $200 million and then they rip off their country for another 200, then they rip off their business for 300 million and make everybody, all the stock owners power. And you say, well, he's got $300 million, why does he need more? I don't know what you do with $300 million. It would be an enormous nuisance if you ask me, I mean, baggage, but you say, well, what craves, why do they want more and more? Or you read a robber, he robs John Dillinger used to, I think now, he just robbed that bank there last weekend and got $28,000. Now Thursday he's robbing another bank in another town. So even as a kid, I'd think, well, why does Dillinger need more money? He's got He couldn't have spent it since last Thursday. But the next Thursday, he's robbing another bank. And then a week later, he'd be in another town. I lived in the Midwest, and my mother was always afraid of John Dillinger. We locked the doors at night because John Dillinger is loose. And he was always robbing another bank and then another store. I said, well, what did he need all that money for? He's already got this old car, and he's got gas in it. I mean, what does he want with all this? But there's no end to that. Below that, you start to handle fear itself. See, we said desire is craving this. Under that is a fear, and fear runs most of the world most of the time. Fear, everything. The number of fears to conquer fear, a fear, doesn't really solve it, because fearfulness is a state of consciousness, and it will just invent new things to be afraid of tomorrow, afraid of yesterday catching up with them. So fearfulness then is a lack of faith in God, and one lives in constant. One may withdraw and become despondent. So as we go down, we see the eventuality of depression, despair, the giving upness of hopelessness. Out of the pridefulness, then, underneath there is anger, the wantingness. Now, the direction that you move is what's important. It's not where you're at. It isn't bad that you're here and good that you're here. Maybe subjectively, experientially it is. What's important is what direction you're moving. The direction that you're moving. The great value of television is that the third world countries that lived in apathy, when television came on in the poor neighborhoods all over the world, people that were in apathy saw all the beautiful things on TV. Gee, how Americans live and all that. Wow. Out of that came desire. Out of apathy, they began to want. Well, right, to come out of hopeless apathy. What's hopeless apathy? You don't pick up the garbage on the streets. You don't give a damn about anything. You don't bother getting auto insurance. You get a ticket, you don't bother going to court. Apathy is like uselessness. It's very hard to handle. Uselessness leads to more uselessness, and it becomes, whole subcultures are based in uselessness. All right, so if you get that person then out of apathy and up to desire, now you can get them up to anger. Hey, now they're angry. All the have-nots have it, and I don't have it. And we'll bomb America and get even with them because they have it and we don't have it, whatever. Anyway, out of this anger then, out of the anger, you get more energy. And then out of the beginning of pridefulness, you have the courage to face the reality of what it takes. You see? What it takes to get out of apathy and poverty and not having this to having this. Well, when people find out what it takes, they change their story a little bit. Because I counsel a lot of those people. They want to stay in bed in the morning. I said, no, you can't in this world. You have to get up at 6 o'clock any morning, even if it's cold and dark out. You have to get dressed, and you have to travel to school or to work. Oh, I ain't gonna bother with that. But you can't have it both ways, folks, So courage is facing, biting the bullet, that yes, you do have to force yourself to get up. That's why we have alarm clocks. Of course you'd rather stay in bed and listen to the radio, etc. All right, so this is biting the bullet. So 200 is a very critical level. What you get in return is now, instead of coming out of weakness and the utilization of force, you come into real power. Real power now begins to totally change your life. People react to you differently, respond to you differently. Your intentions tend to manifest within the world. A friend of mine who's moving upward rather rapidly spiritually said to me just the other day, he said, gee, I was holding exactly what I wanted from this guy in my mind, reviewing it. I wanted this, 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 and the other thing. He says, then I ran into the guy, and instantly he said to me, you know what I think I want to do for you? I want to do this, 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 and this. And he says, that's exactly what I was thinking about failover. That's a subjective experience. So what you hold in mind now tends to manifest, and therefore comes the saying, be careful of what you hold in mind because it tends to materialize. Because as you move up and become more powerful, it does tend to materialize. Down here, near the bottom, we have starvation. At 20 or so, there's barely enough life energy to pull to you that which you need to survive. To be born into this world with a calibrated level of 25 means you'll probably be born in Ethiopia, Biafra, someplace. Your parents will probably have AIDS. You'll probably be dead by age 6 months of starvation. 20 hasn't got what it takes to pull nurturance to it. Totally lacks power. It's why you can't cure poverty with money, because poverty is a reflection of a level of consciousness. It will always pull poverty to it. People seek the bottom of the barrel because most people who attend these lectures are, conditioned by a meritocracy in which we assume moving upward and forward is what life is all about. Huh? So there are people who are born, don't ask me why, at a consciousness level of 25. There's one place where I go and see patients. The consciousness level of the patient population there is 35. 35. Here's the consciousness level of the population there. All right, so some people are born to a low level of consciousness. They arrive because of what we will probably find we'll discover later on. We have permission to ask this in front of this audience, resist. Because of prior karma, resist. The answer we get is prior karma. You can argue with it, I don't care if you believe it. Because of prior karma, they are arriving at a level of 25 or 30. Huh? Maybe then, in the lifetime as a warrior where you slaughtered the captives instead of allowing them and giving them some kind of freedom, if it was your choice, you could either let them live or not live. And you let them all die, the consequence could be that you have blocked off the light further and further and further until now you yourself are an entity that vibrates either with or without a physical body at 35. That entity vibrates at 35. Whether it's in or out of a body is relatively immaterial. If it's out of a body, it will experience the hells in other domains. If it materializes in this world time, in this world it's going to be here. So spiritual work then is making choices that move us up towards the light. So that's all we do in spiritual work. And the whole use of this scale, the whole use of what we learn from it, is merely to support the intention on the part of everyone here to move forward in consciousness and to fulfill the human potential. Being a human being is extremely difficult. And if you look at the whole evolution of life on this planet, you see it coming up from germplasm on up through primitive life forms. You see the energy field of 70 is the energy field of the era of the dinosaur. The dinosaur is the rapacious energy that lives only by the destruction of others. The dinosaur only is alive because it kills you. If it doesn't catch you, it'll catch you. So it lives by the death of others. Huh? Later on in evolution, we see that the dinosaur finally disappeared itself. It brought a meteor to kill it off or something. I don't know how it did it, but the dinosaur managed to kill itself off. And we saw the emergence of the herbivore. We saw the emergence of a whole different line of evolution. The herbivore does not live by the killing of anybody or any other thing or any other entity. In fact, the herbivore, as it eats the grass, you know, it takes the oxygen and it takes the sunshine, the chlorophyll that the plants have put together, turns it into fertilizer, it makes more grass. Doesn't kill anybody. It eats the top off the grass, but the root still survives. So we see the emergence of that which is benign. That which is benign does not have to kill for survival. Huh? As we get above the line then, we see that we might say the collective human karma then began to manifest in the evolution of higher levels of life. Now, Cro-Magnon man, Neanderthal man, Homo erectus, finally Homo sapien. Homo sapien wasn't really aware of much of anything yet. Homo sapien knew more than Homo erectus, but still was not a walking genius by any means, right? Took hundreds of thousands of years. Slow, painful evolution. And then came the emergence of spiritual awareness. First, spiritual awareness was intuitive and began to ascribe, events to the stars and the weather, and then mysterious entities called gods, etc. And human consciousness then evolved to the point of greater spiritual awareness, and in so doing, it went through primitive forms, anthropomorphic gods and primitive gods, etc. It finally reached a state, however, in which God became the ultimate symbol of morality, ethics, right and wrong. It became the yardstick for behavior. And guilt emerged, profound guilt. So that being a human being is extremely difficult because the evolutionary tree of a human is via the animal. This same thing here is made of bone and blood and meat. This thing here is meat on a stick. Never thought of it that way. People say, do you eat meat or don't meat? I said, man, you are meat. Every lion knows that. Ask a lion what you are. He'll tell you, meat, your dinner, your lunch, as far as he's concerned. You're a lion's lunch. So, the human brain then is structured based on the emergence of the animal. So we see awareness coming up through the animal kingdom and becoming more and more complex. That complexity being the neuronal structures of the human brain. And the beginning of spiritual awareness now puts man in the most difficult, if you ask me, position possible. You have, on the one hand, animal instincts, which run you, whether you like it or not, by the very structure of the brain that you inherit. And now you have spiritual awareness. So the human being is balanced between the animal and the spiritual. So you can't just chop up your enemies with glee anymore. That throws you into a terrible guilt complex. It's against the law, it's illegal, etc. So now the human being lives in a world, however, of possibility. The animal does not live in a world of possibility. The lion sees a rabbit running. There's no possibility except to eat the rabbit. What else can he do? He's not going to read the rabbit a book, you know what I mean? So the animal side is instinctual. The animal side is built in, it's wired into the human brain. So genetically you come onto this planet without remembering to ask to even do that. Nobody asked me, did you remember being asked, do you want to get born this time? I don't remember. Without being consulted. Speaking of politically correct, do you really think we should allow that to continue? What are my rights? I wasn't even consulted about whether the most important fact is I exist. And nobody even asked me about that, much less as a male or a female or what. Well, color, nothing was asked. So there you are. All of a sudden you're here, and you've got this human brain that's based on the animal brain. The ego is from a global understanding, the evolution of the animal. The ego, from here down, is nothing but the animal. This is all animal, right? Today's headlines, our newsreel, you can see on any monkey island in any zoo. The world is Monkey Island. Gimme, gimme, kill, 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 rape, 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 hold her down and have sex with her, kill them. That's what you see on Monkey Island, you know? The alpha male, the alpha female, jealousy, competition, territoriality, possessiveness, greed, all that runs the human domain is not different than the animal world. So one way of looking at the ego, then, is to have compassion for it as your little animal. This is your little animal, and he gets mad, he wants, somebody gets ahead of you in traffic, oh, that son of a bitch. You know what I mean? Beat on the window, pass me by. Anyway, you gotta win, fight. Okay, the human brain is wired that way. So what's the point of feeling guilty about it? There's no point of feeling guilty about it. There's no point of grieving about it. That's just the animal. So the ego then is nothing but the animal. It gets labeled evil, bad, all that. But if you forget all the labels, it's really just the animal. If you give up judgmentalism, you can just accept it for what it is and say, of course it wants to do that. Of course it wants to do that. Anything good happens in my life, I say, okay, let's hear it from the ego. Something good happens, spiritual ego comes right up and says, aren't you marvelous? Isn't that wonderful? You know it's going to come right up there. That's what it does. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it spiritual ego. Okay. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Ah, there you go. How to get out of guilt and fear and everything about your own ego. It's nothing but the animal, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. Millions and millions of years, it learned how to survive. It's supposed to do that. It's supposed to go give you the whim-whams. It's supposed to go, girl, I want to kill that SOB, huh? You say, okay, I heard it. So that's what the animal in you is trained and is supposed to do. If it wasn't successful, you wouldn't be here today. It's because you owe your life to the success of your animal predecessors. Your success as a human being, not your success with a capital S. Or your fate, depending on how you look at it. Anyway. So here you are, a spiritually aware being stuck with animal instincts. They're wired, they're in your hardware. The thalamic nuclei, the nuclei at the base of the brain where the big emotional limbic system comes out, it's automatic, it's triggers. I could show somebody a flash card and your limbic system's going to go right off. The electroencephalogram shows that flash. You haven't even had a chance to say hello about it. Yes or no, built in. Not only is the animal brain built in with all these negative emotions here, but at the very back of the brain, you have the old dinosaur brain. The reptilian brain is still at the back of the brain, right? Everybody knows anything about anatomy, knows at the back of the brain is, what is it? The rhinencephalon or some horrible name. Something you don't want to meet in the dark at night. I think it's a rhinencephalon. It sounds scary, whatever it is. Anyway, the old primitive reptilian brain is still at the back of your head. Every evolution of the animal chain as it evolved is represented in some nucleus in your hypothalamus or your figulatoris. Take that. This is in your figulatoris right here, and when it wiggles, I just get that feeling. I don't know, every time I look at a doctor, I just shake all over. I don't know, dude. It sets off her figulatoris into a scare thing, huh? Because her head says enemy. Uh-oh, enemy, prey, predator, response. Prey, predator, response. So these levels of consciousness then, Now what happens is consciousness begins to evolve. Consciousness begins to evolve. We see the beginning of intelligence. I love that wonderful gray parrot. It's University of South Arizona, Arizona there. What's that parrot's name? I forget. Anyway, this parrot talks and thinks and can pick out colors, choices, numbers. She'll say to him, get green cube. Oh, he goes over and gets the green cube. Put down green cube. Oh, get 4 red round. Oh, 4 red round. Your parrot knows how to think already. And of course, you all know Coco, the gorilla, who has quite a big vocabulary of 800 words or something like that, and knows sign language. So we see the emergence then of thinkingness, the capacity. So we're talking about now is the emergence of the forebrain. The capacity to think, present even in birds, present and becomes more and more complex. That gives you more ways to suffer now than you had ever thought of before. With a forebrain, man, you can feel guilty about everything from instant to instant. Why did I say that? Why did I do this? Why did I wear this? Oh, golly, why didn't I bring my hat? How come I forgot to guess? Geez, did I? All right, so now the capacity for suffering increases enormously. On the other hand, the capacity for satisfaction does. So we come out of the animal world, then what I'm trying to do is recontextualize the ego. The ego is not a bad, it's not a awful. It'll take you to terrible places if you let it run you. It'll take you to terrible places. But it gets scary labels put on it in the spiritual and religious worlds. It gets scary words, sin and evil, and oh my God. Now you lay awake at night, worrying about all that stuff. The animal naturally wants to be right. The animal naturally wants to win. The animal doesn't care about other animals. It would just as soon kill it and take over its prey, take over its mate, take over its territory. So what Freud called the id, what is in the id is the animal. So based on a profound spiritual premise, let go resisting things, you let go resisting it. Instead of suppressing it and repressing it or denying it, what mankind does is repress all this, deny it because of guilt, and project it into the world. He doesn't eliminate it, he just moved it out there. Well, it's much nicer to feel that they're the bad guy and that you're not the bad guy. They're the ones. So naturally, the Americans, because they're successful, made bin Laden do what he did. And there's all kinds of leftist columnists. No sooner did it happen than they instantly got on TV and started blaming America for being responsible for bin Laden doing what he did. By virtue of the fact that you save your money, work hard, and get out of the bed in the morning instead of laying in bed, and have learned how to use the wheel and count, now you should get killed, see? So, I've been in parts of the world where the wheel hasn't really been used. I was up in the top of the Andes, and they're still dragging things around with sticks. So help me God, that was in the 70s. Like they hadn't heard of the wheel yet. Everybody's going alongside the road pulling 2 sticks. Not even the wheel, not even the wheel. It was in the 1970s. Okay, so we have this spiritual dilemma then of the animal instincts coming out of evolution, can't be avoided. So that's our karma. We have the karma of the animal kingdom, right? If you didn't have the karma of an animal kingdom, we'd all be in spirit. We wouldn't be sitting on our butts in chairs. We'd be floating around the room, which I really like myself. I've never been an enthusiast of the human body. As a kid, other kids seemed to be very enthused about it. They like to wrestle and do all kinds of disgusting things. Get their dirty, grimy fingers they've been picking their nose with and stick it in your eye in a wrestling match. No, thank you. Disgusting. No, thanks. What?
Break.
I never liked locker rooms. And anyway, the physicality of being an animal was never my greatest thing. And while the other kids were playing hoop ball, I was reading the great books of the Western world, Plato, arguing with Plato, and various things. So that's how people enter the world. They enter at a certain thing. It comes out of their past experience, their past life, their past decisions. And apparently there's a decision now to transcend the physicality and the compulsion of the animal. So what we in spiritual work try to do is overcome the compulsiveness of the ego, of the animal reflex, to not automatically respond with guilt, automatically respond with fear. So as we go up, we become more and more free. Somewhere up here is the word freedom, and I've lost it. Well, as you begin letting go of things, you come out of this level, and you begin to reach a level called neutrality. I'm starting out this morning on the lower levels, and we'll move up. The day will get better as we go along. I wanted to handle today's headlines. Some of the headlines this week were just, I say, oh wow, but I really can't even repeat them to somebody else. So that's the animalness. So we can stop feeling guilty about animal impulses. We can forgive them. I think everybody should give their body a nickname and adopt it as a pet. I have adopted this as a pet. And you see how friendly it is. It does what I want it to do. It expresses, I mean, it's just a marvelous thing. It does all kinds of wondrous things. So the best thing to do is to make a friend with it and get to know it for what it is. It wants to win, it wants to survive, it has all these animal needs, and we can stop feeling guilty about it. If you don't feel guilty about it, you don't have to deny it. If you don't deny it, I mean, what kind of an animal are you anyway? Don't you want to win? What are you, stupid? What? Of course you want to win. And if somebody passes you on the highway, don't you want to drive them off the highway and watch them turn over? Of course you do, it's fun. There, take that, you. Okay, so you cheer your animal on, you become its champion. You see what's happened now? You've adopted it. It doesn't have power over you. You see, by owning it, you don't have to deny it. When you don't deny it, you don't have to feel guilt. When you accept it for what it is, you don't have to project it into the world. So you don't see all that evil in the world anymore because you stop projecting it. It's because you felt guilty about various things, you project it into the world. You think they're after you, they're out to get... No, that's your projection onto the world, see? The world then becomes a movie in which you see that which you project. The more you own the downside, the less you project. And now instead of seeing the world as tragic, like my grandmother and crying all morning every time she read the paper, you see it as an absurdity. Huh? It's an absurdity. So now as you move up, it becomes tragic but also absurd, not to really be taken seriously. Why? Because each player on the field is where they are as a result of their own decision to be there. It's by one's own choices. We heard the fellow who blew up the world, it wasn't the World Trade Center, who was the fellow that blew up the Oklahoma building? All right, so whatever his name was. He made that choice consciously. He deliberated, made careful plans. And as he went to the gas chamber, he said he presumed he was going to hell. And then he hopefully said, but you meet a lot of nice people, you know, meet all your friends there. So that, and nobody forced him to do it, did they? So everyone here is here because we've all made choices. And I want everybody to become friendly with their ego, to accept their id, give it a name, become its owner, put it on a leash, and that's the wisdom of the famous Zen ox herding pictures, is it not? In the beginning, the ox is wild and untamable, and then with spiritual evolution, you see the person riding the ox, and then we'll get to the next pictures after a break, shall we? So we should take a break. Yeah? Well, we've got other slides, and I want to get into other slides because I'm going to get bored with this slide if we don't change it soon. Slide's a little crooked. Instead of my talking and then we have question and answers later, I think it's better to raise your hand or just holler, and we'll do it right then because that's when it's spontaneous, and if I answer it half an hour later, you won't be interested in that question anymore. So we'll get it while it's hot. Okay. All right. The levels of consciousness, yes.
When you test kinesiologically,
Do you know what she's saying? You gotta
Yeah,
tell
when
me.
you test kinesiology.
Yes?
do you ask for some sort of permission? before?
Yes.
Yes.
Could you explain?
We haven't mentioned the technique this morning. The technique is very, very simple. It takes about 20 seconds to learn this technique. We have permission to ask this question in front of the audience. Resist. There are multiple heavens. Resist. Isn't that interesting? Let's ask another fun question. The time of your death is already set at the time of your birth. Resist. That's just, you don't have to worry about death anymore. And you don't have to worry about heaven. Aren't you glad you came to today's lecture? All right, the moment you're going to leave is already preset, so there's no point in worrying about death and, worrying whether every bite of lasagna is going to kill you or not. Because if you're destined to go at 82, whatever you eat is whatever you eat, you know what I mean? On the other hand, you might be in lousy health when you die instead of good health. Croak over in the pink, I like to croak over in the pink, you know what I mean?
Would that mean for suicide also? If your death is already planned, does that mean a person that's been suicide? I had a neighbor who tried and failed.
Well, there's a matter of choice there. There's a matter of choice. No, I don't think suicide is predestined, no, because that would violate the freedom of the will of God. No, you would have the choice of life versus death. At that point, you have the choice of life or death or surrendering to God. So the point of suicide is a critical spiritual opportunity. At that point, one can completely surrender the totality of all you think you are and what is going. You can surrender all of it to God. You can either commit suicide or suddenly go into a really high state. You can transcend right from the doors of hell. And heaven and hell are 1/10 of an inch apart. And having been there, I can attest to the truth of that statement. From the very depths of hell, which are worse than anyone can imagine, there was the total surrendering and then emergence into a totally different paradigm. Yes?
You asked me to remind you about calibrating the consciousness of the audience.
Oh yes, the audience. We've got the audience. I always forget the audience is here. I don't know why. We have permission to ask this. We always ask permission. Do we have permission? The permission also depends on context. Sometimes you'll get a yes because in other words, I may get a yes, I may get a no in front of the audience, but can I ask this at home? It'll say yes. Why? Because there may be people in the audience that would be too upsetting to, and it's not advisable to create scandal, huh? This audience is over, let me guess, it's over 4:30, 4:32, 4:33, 4:34, 4:35. Oh, before we started, this audience was over 4:33, 4:34, 4:35, 4:36. Before we started to speak this morning, this audience is over 4:35, 4:36. This audience is now over 4:36, 4:37, 4:30. Oh my God, we'll do it at the beginning and the end. All right, I'm glad I was reminded of that. To merely hear certain information already has a transformative effect. just the hearingness of the information. Just to know you don't have to fight your ego, blame it, feel guilt about it, go to hell because of it. You can adopt it as a pet and train it. You know, it's fun. And of course it gets, and we said you should champion all its animal instincts and say, hey, good for you, you did just what you're supposed to do. And instantly you're off the guilt. You understand what I'm saying? You're on top of it instead of underneath it. I wanted to finish up the levels of consciousness this morning. We've got some fun graphs I want to show you this afternoon. And anyway, these levels of consciousness then are really the evolution of consciousness towards the light. It would be like that is an innate quality of consciousness itself. On the other hand, consciousness is in no hurry. It can take eons. Eons. This consciousness, we have permission to ask about it, has existed for eons. Before all time even started, have been. So that which you are has already been around for eons, you understand? And out of all those eons, this is where it has arrived at this moment. And we can then calibrate that and even reflect it on this scale of consciousness. We have a pointer now. As I was saying, if you hold it in mind, it'll appear. I just realized that. That is funny, isn't it? Okay. We were going to show, you know, so that you understand the human condition. We said that society reflects this map of consciousness. Where is society? I was going to do this afternoon, but we'll do it this morning so you won't be frustrated while you eat lunch. Here. If we calibrate the level of consciousness of all of humanity, here's where it is. 78% is below 200, huh? So here's another scale, maybe easier to see, huh? That one's a little too dark. This one's lighter. Yeah, there we go. A friend of mine did this, Lou Fournier, who attends the lectures, and today he can't be here. Anyway, he does these on his, while we were giving the lecture last time, or the time before, he was sitting there with his computer, and by the time we finished the lecture, he had this set up to go. And so that's the distribution. Consequently, what do you think today's newspaper is going to be about, huh? So it's going to be, because the newspapers are generally around 385. This is CBS News, NBC, the news broadcasts are around in the upper 300s. What's his name? O'Reilly, the Factor. He's around. The Fox News is up around here. CNN is up around here. Anyway, so the way this world looks to this level of consciousness is going to be the day's news. However, the news also focuses a great deal on the 400s, and we'll be talking about the 400s later this morning. That's the percentage, that's how the world population is distributed. And here's my latest masterpiece. I did the crude originals and Lou did the refinement. And this is sort of how the world is distributed. 84% of the population transcends 10. But that leaves 16% to die, right? 16% is in the process of death itself, or very close to death. The United States of America calibrates around 400 and in the 400s. The modern European, Western civilized world calibrates in the 400s. This is the world of civilization as we know it. Civilization as we know it, how it has evolved until this point in time. All right, so that was just to give you an idea of the distribution. The majority of mankind, when you see how that's distributed, then you see that The majority of mankind has not reached the level of integrity, has not reached this level here. The majority of mankind is in the lower part of the box, which gives you a certain degree of compassion for it. In other words, people can't help being other than how they are. Understand that? Whether someone is a perpetrator or a victim is all a point of view. Is bin Laden a perpetrator? No. He's the victim of ignorance. Is he someone to hate or someone to feel sorry for? To be so ignorant about the nature of God and reality, to be so unevolved, to be less than an animal. You know, even the wolf pack cares for its mates. Huh? So, is he someone to be hated, or so we might say that people in the lower part of the box are the victims of their own ignorance. That's what Jesus said when he said, forgive them for they know not what they do. Their level of consciousness isn't high enough for them to even see that they got a choice to be other than they are. So one of the consequences of karma is the range of choice. People at the bottom of the box don't have the choice to be other than what they are. Spiritual evolution has been earned to have a choice, that you have a spiritual option is a choice. You see how few are the options of a person at the bottom of the box. If you're born on certain streets in certain big cities, you either become a member of the gang or you die, right? I always get a kick out of treatment centers. We take them out of the gangs, we treat them this, we treat them all this, and you send them back, how are they going to survive? You want to behave like middle-class Protestant America ideal on the streets of the inner city? Yeah, good luck. If you want to survive, you have to transcend it. Why? Because then you have choices. You don't have any choices when you live on a certain block. You either join the gang that runs that block, or you get eliminated. They don't have the choices. To see that, then you see that each person is, to some degree, the victim of where they are in the evolution of consciousness. To some degree, if you like victimology, victimology is a very big subject in today's society. There's a great deal of competition to be victim. Everybody's trying to get into the camera. All right. So we said that over here, the lower levels are power. Power is a substitute for, lower levels are force. And that force is a substitute for power. Those who have power don't need force because they influence everything within their domain by virtue of what they are, by virtue of what one has become. So the greatest service we can give to all of humanity is to become all that we can become to the best of our ability. And that energy radiates out and lifts the level of consciousness of all of mankind. We should have a little line in here. Mankind was at 190. 190. That's pridefulness, arrogance, and of course denial. That's the rule of righteousness. Righteousness scares me because righteousness is the justification for every major devastation we've ever seen in society. When people talk about the righteous, give me a break. It is out of righteousness that all the horrors of mankind arise. So, mankind's history, if you watch the History Channel, the International History Channel, is a fascinating channel to watch because you see the evolution of consciousness as it expresses itself in the interactions of society in different cultures throughout all of time. It's really, when I was a kid, I hated history because it seemed like a dead subject. But now it's my favorite subject because you see the dance of the ego as it expresses itself in human interaction. And you can calibrate the levels of the playing fields involved in the Napoleon and all the great Henry VIII. When you calibrate all the levels of the monarchs throughout history, and great many other world leaders, you see why the world is the way it was. Huh? It's only by becoming conscious that a person can avoid being swayed by the demagogues who routinely sway society. Huh? So down here we have force, and force is a substitute for power. As one's integrity begins to, you see, over here we have the view of ourself. Over here everybody's miserable. They're not deserving to live. They should kill themselves because they're evil. The lady who's on TV right now killing 5 children is probably down here in the very bottom. Sees herself as evil, etc., etc., and sees herself as hopeless and tragic and all these things. All right, so the view of the self, miserable, undeserving of life, evil, tragic, frightening, disappointing, weak. Now, as we get up towards anger, one's self-view becomes belligerent. So the kids we get off the street at the treatment center are belligerent. They're all into, what is that called, dissing each other. If you don't flag their colors or something as you go by, you've been dissed, and now that justifies stabbing them or something, burning down their clubhouse. They live in a strange world, see, with its own rules. All right, so the viewpoint of God then is a reflection of one's level of consciousness. And this culturally, as it is expressed over the centuries, has had a profound impact on society. Profound impact. These are all levels of egomania in a way. These are all levels of egocentricity. At the bottom of the box, God despises you. God hates you. He throws you into hell because you are a worthless, sinful worm. Because you're evil, you see God is vindictive. This is the God of the Old Testament. This is the God of the Old Testament. So these are the negative depictions of God. They come out of, as Freud said, out of the unconscious, out of the id. All that you hate and despise about yourself, you project onto a deity. And the God of the Old Testament and many other cultures are really demonic. So these are the demonic depictions of God. God despises you. He's vindictive. He wants to he's also sadistic. He likes to be cruel and throw you into hell for endless torture. He disdains you. It has nothing to do with you. He condemns you. He's punitive. God gets even with you. God of the Old Testament was prone to jealousy and vanity, and he would get pissed and blow you away. Punitive God. So this is the God of Judgment Day that everybody's scared of. Let's settle Judgment Day. We took care of death and heaven and all. Let's do Judgment Day. We have permission to ask about Judgment Day, resist. Judgment Day is today, resist. Thank you. Judgment Day is today. Judgment Day for this person here is now, today. For the persons in the audience is today, resist. Every day is Judgment Day. Because every day you make a decision that moves you as an iron filing in the electromagnetic field of God. To be here today has already changed your karma instantly, right? You're a different iron filing than you were yesterday. Every day is Judgment Day. If you die right now, you're going to go wherever you are right this instant, right? Next week, God's not going to change. All right, so this God is punitive. The angry God, this God denies you. The person is always wanting something. These are the prayers, dear God, please give me a new Cadillac, right? A new Mercedes-Benz. What's that song by? Mercedes-Benz, okay. So this is where kids get disillusioned with religion and God, you know. I remember running to catch the bus, and I would live down the country, and it was a mile to the nearest bus, and I had a violin lesson in town, and I'm running down this, I get out of school 5 minutes late, and the freaking bus leaves in 20 minutes, and I got exactly 1 mile to go, and I'm running with my violin, and I'm praying up a storm. I mean, I was really, because, I mean, if you missed your violin lesson and missed the bus, God help you. And just as I got close to the bus, it drove away. Well, that's what we all have to face sooner or later in childhood, isn't it? I pray that I passed the test and you got a D minus. Oh, okay. So here God's angry, he's mad at people. God seems to hate people. I mean, if God's the creator of man and woman, you know, why would he hate you? Or anyway, he created us as not having the ability to tell truth from falsehood. Life would have been different if Eve had known kinesiology. She had never attended one of these lectures, so she gave in to curiosity. Okay, out of that curiosity then she went from the oneness, the Garden of Eden is the peace and stillness of oneness, and she bought into duality. She bought into perception, and out of duality you get conflict, good and evil, heaven and hell, and all the rest. So she bit into what the 400s does best, and this from that. So from an enlightened state of innocent simplicity in which there is no conflict, there was the buying into the world of perception, and there was born duality. And thus the fate of man is allegorically at least described. All right, so these gods are then very angry gods, and of course not only vengeful, but here's a God that's indifferent. Here I am running for my violin lesson, and what the hell, am I nobody in the world? So this is your view of yourself as a worm, you know. You pray up a storm and nothing happens. This is the disillusionment of childhood with religion. They prayed and prayed for something, and it never happened. So-and-so died anyway. Yep. All right. Now we get to courage. Our view of God begins to change. Huh? God is perhaps a possibility and of a different nature now, because now 200 is a level of empowerment. 200 is, you remember EST back in the 70s, Werner Erhard seminars training? The purpose of EST was to get you off projecting blame and to own, to become empowered by owning that it wasn't the traffic that made you late, and if you were late to an S meeting, you had to stand outside the door, and the trainer would ask you why you were late. You'd say, well, I missed the bus. You have to stand there and wait some more. And the elevator was slow, and the alarm didn't go off, And finally you say, well, I chose to be late. You may come in now. You had to own yourself, that some aspect of you decided that, see? Some aspect. You didn't set 2 alarms, you didn't set a backup to make sure, etc. Okay, so the reason Werner did that is because he tried to get you over the level of 200. So if you did S, you were successful if you now had the courage to own your own decisions and take responsibility. Down here, the blame is put out there. These kids that I treat, the girls' ranch, they never did anything wrong. The other one always made them do it. Many famous murders, ones that preoccupied the public for a long time. The reason that perpetrator never appears to be guilty is because she deserved it. She made me do it. She made me do it. What's there to feel guilty about, huh? To not own. So that person calibrates below 200. The difficulty with getting the kids in the girls' ranch to improve is you can't get them to own that they're the author of their own decisions. So here the blame is put out there. It's the other guy's fault. Huh? All right, so you affirm then a 200 you have courage. When you get up to 250 is neutrality. 250 is you've become released from attachments. There's a method known as releasing, which I think is a very excellent method. Letting go, wanting to change things, control things, become detached from things so you stop controlling everything and stop worrying what people. If you are a good releaser, you certainly end up at least at 250, which is neutral. And neutral is very comfortable. People at neutral, here if you don't get the job, you kill yourself, or you kill the other guy, or you blame yourself, or you go into depression and stop eating and take an overdose. Up here, in neutral, it's okay if it goes that way and it's okay if it doesn't. You're not riding on what happens out there. You're not living on the projections of the ego. In neutral, if you get the job, it's okay, and if you don't, there's a lot of other ones. Anybody tells me there's unemployment, doesn't know what they're talking about. I can open the unemployment page, the employment pages, jobs wanted, help wanted pages of any newspaper in the United States and find 3 or 4 pages of jobs. I can walk down any street in America, it says help wanted anywhere. Do it in Sedona. It says help wanted on every single block. It's not out there. Unemployment is not out there. Unemployment is in your head. Right after World War II, all the vets came back. We all got 5220. I only got 5220, but I also had 3 jobs at the same time. Right? Survival. All right, so the willingness then. Neutral is okay. As we get up to willingness, we have a whole different inspiration. We become, God is inspiring, things look hopeful. People in willingness are fun to be with. People in willingness are cheerful, optimistic, they help. If 1 or 2 people are trying to lift a sofa, a person in willingness comes over and says, can I help? They just automatically do that. They do that because that's who they are. Because when you're moving up to lovingness, then you're becoming an asset on the planet. These people are a detriment on the planet. They make cannon fodder. They're useful that way, cannon fodder. But they're not really an asset. In fact, the 78% below that level there are really supported by these at the top. These are the people at the top that allow to keep these people alive. If it wasn't for the people at the top, they wouldn't have sidewalks to walk on. You know what I mean? You wouldn't have a car to get into. You wouldn't have the steel to make the car. It's the people up here that provide the jobs, that provide the income, that provide the taxes, that provide the services, off which these people live, because these people don't pay any taxes. So these people are powerfully productive. So the sales manager just gets the team together, he gives them a pep talk, they all feel fantastic when they walk out. It's because he's probably at least around 350 or so. He's up there in the positive. These are the go-getters of the world. And what gives them their power is intention. So what Werner taught in S, if it's your intention, absolutely, to get to that lecture at 1 o'clock, you will be there. And failure to be there at 1 o'clock is a defect of intention. So Werner always made you responsible for your intention. It means your intention is out. Your integrity is out. If your intention is there, intention overcomes all kinds of obstacles. And a fierce, determined intention can overcome almost anything in this world. Fierce intention is what you discover in sports when you reach, or in exercise, or in labor. When you reach the point beyond which you cannot go, you white knuckle it, clench your teeth, and by your intention, you drive through the barrier. It's an incredible experience to do it. Many people have had it in sports, running, in various ways. I discovered it in a warehouse when I could not lift one more box of canned goods in Thiensville, Wisconsin, 110 degrees in a pea cannery, and 110 degrees in this warehouse with no windows, and I could not lift one more box, not one more. And I was never a heavyweight to begin with. And anyway, after maybe 12 or 14 hours in this heat, no water, no God knows what, I said, I can't do it. And then something came up, and there was this incredible decision to go through the barrier. And I crashed through the barrier, and all of a sudden the boxes became weightless. I lifted them like feathers. I could have kept going for days, and I've done that many times on lifting stone and all. Once you discover what's beyond that barrier, the runner discovers that, pushes itself to the limit, and will not accept the limit, and by intention drives through it. And suddenly the runningness happens of its own. The runningness happens of its own. To some degree, this is also exactly the same as it is with spiritual work. When you get to a certain point, you cannot go any further. And suddenly, you're out in the free, and everything happens spontaneously. All right, so willingness is also the open door to success. Willingness is powerful because the person here owns that it's their intention, takes responsibility. They're optimistic, they're willing, world is hopeful, and God now becomes an inspiration. Acceptance is even higher than that, because acceptance now, there's a willingness to forgive on a spiritual level. Acceptance is a harmonious and more merciful way. When we were talking this morning, instead of condemning your ego as being the evil in you and all the rest, the devil and Satan, and giving it all kinds of horrific names, if we're accepting, then we accept it, we forgive the ego for being what it is. I mean, it grew up as an animal. What do you think it's going to do? Algebra? You know, the animal knew it was going to do algebra. All right, so we transcend positionality through forgiveness and acceptance. We come into a merciful state of mind. If you're merciful towards your animal, then you're merciful towards other people's animal, huh? So when somebody passes you on the highway, you say, good luck. I don't care if he gets in front of me. You know what I mean? We're all going to arrive at the same place, same time anyway, which is the next stop and go light. We're all going to be sitting there at the red, so let him get a car ahead, makes a difference.